Welcome to the Times of Israel's daily briefing. Today is Tuesday, March 18th, day 523 of the war. Amanda Borschel-Dan here with our diplomatic reporter, Lazar Berman, joining us from our Jerusalem office. Hi, Lazar. Thanks for joining me.
Hello, Amanda. Good to be here.
The extended ceasefire in Gaza collapsed early this morning, and the IDF has issued evacuation orders for parts of the Gaza Strip, signaling a new offensive is in the works. We'll discuss what brought Israel to this decision and where things stand right now in terms of the hostage release ceasefire negotiations, if at all. We'll hear about a new proposal for where the U.S. and Israel may think that the Gazan population may agree to potentially evacuate to while the Strip is being rebuilt. The ceasefire between Israel and Hamas collapsed early this morning after roughly 2 months as the Israel Defense Forces launched dozens of strikes throughout Gaza under the orders from Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who cited the terror group's, quote, repeated refusal to release Israeli hostages. So Israel reportedly let the U.S. know that it was resuming strikes on Gaza before carrying them out, and U.S. President Donald Trump apparently gave a green light. But Lazar, before we talk about what the strikes are exactly, let's discuss what brought Israel to this decision. We heard yesterday from our military reporter, Emmanuel Fabian, that there were several cases already during these 2 months in which the IDF did perform strikes, mostly drone operations, especially on suspected terrorists who were potentially planting booby traps or bombs for the IDF forces. What was the proverbial straw that broke the camel's back this time?
Let's just set up where we are in terms of talks and the lack of talks. The first phase of the hostage deal ended on March 1st, meaning the ceasefire is officially over. Now, there's been some frustration in Israel because it seems like Netanyahu and his government were acting like the ceasefire was continuing. So we weren't firing on Hamas. We weren't sending more ground troops in. We weren't retaking the Netzarim corridor. We were acting as if the ceasefire was continuing when in fact there was no basis for the ceasefire to continue. And it wasn't like Hamas was releasing more hostages. What we wanted throughout and what we still want is for Hamas to agree to more hostage releases in exchange for a temporary but extended ceasefire. We've heard reports based on what U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff has put forth, which would bring the ceasefire, initially it was 60 days, now it's less than that, but through the end of the Passover holiday in mid-April. Now, throughout that time, since the end of the first phase, until now, Hamas has been saying, well, we're supposed to move to the second phase or at least talk about it. And Israel has not wanted to do that because that would mean basically an end to the war with Hamas remaining in power. So what Israel has done is try different ways to find a formula to get hostages out at the beginning of the extended phase release, and it didn't work. They've given up. There was a staged attempt before this to use different types of pressure to show Hamas that it needs to agree to the Israeli-U.S. proposal. There was the cutting off of new aid going into Gaza. Last week, Energy Minister Eli Cohen said that he was cutting off electricity. It was less dramatic than that, but there was electricity that was going to a water desalination plant, which was cut off as well. There was always threats that there would be more means or more ways that Israel is going to up the pressure. And here we saw it last night with wide airstrikes, and Israeli officials say publicly, they also tell me privately that there is more to come. There is a full concrete plan here, and we've only seen the first part of it.
So, Lazar, it sounds like what you're saying is that there wasn't any specific action taken by Hamas that Israel needs to respond to. It's more that the hostage talks have stalled and Israel is seeing renewed conflict, renewed fighting from the air, potentially also from the ground, as another way to put pressure on Hamas.
From my reading, that's the main logic. There are also claims about Hamas preparing terrorist attacks against Israel, against troops on the border, some of them inside Gaza Strip. Hamas denies that. I haven't seen any concrete evidence of that. I wouldn't be surprised if there's always planning going on, but the main reason for something this broad and this powerful is the fact that it is part of an attempt to bring Hamas to the negotiating table on Israel's terms.
So,
Um,
if that's the case, then how is Israel choosing the targets? We're hearing that there are multiple casualties. The Hamas run health ministry in the Gaza Strip is saying something around the number of 240 dead. How is Israel specifically choosing a target?
There is well, first of all, in the last 3 weeks, there's been an opportunity for Israeli intelligence to create a new target bank. You've seen throughout the releases and other points as well that Hamas terrorists are even walking around in uniform, are being much less careful. That doesn't mean the top leaders like Mohammed Sinwar haven't been underground or in hiding, but you've seen that Hamas has acted in a different way, and that has been a nice opportunity for Israeli intelligence to pick up on new targets. The focus has been senior, mostly political uh, officials within the Hamas government, within the Hamas infrastructure. Of course, that doesn't mean that there's a huge difference between the political and the military, but these are not military tactical commanders on the ground like battalion commanders and brigade commanders, most of whom have been killed anyway, though some have been replaced. These are senior officials within the apparatus that Hamas uses or used to control the Gaza Strip. Someone who was effectively the prime minister, someone very senior in the interior security ministry. So these are, and a couple others. So these are people that are senior Hamas officials, and I think the message here to Hamas is that we are going to reach all of you. You are the decision makers, and you better make it clear to everyone else who is making decisions that this needs to end now. If you want to live, there's an opportunity to go into exile. If not, we're going to find every single one of you.
Okay, so let's review where we are in terms of the hostage release negotiations. Last week, of course, we had the meetup in Doha with Steve Witkoff, the U.S. envoy to the Middle East, before he jetted off to try and put out another fire in Ukraine and Russia. And we had, of course, Israel's B team, as we are calling it, with Gal Hirsch, who's our hostage envoy, and Mem from the Shin Bet. And we had other players. We had, of course, Egyptians, we had Qataris. And then those talks, it seemingly crumbled essentially. And then this week on Sunday, Israel sent a team to Cairo to resume some negotiations. I understand that they've come home and that Hamas sent a team yesterday. Is that correct?
That was what was supposed to happen. I'm not sure how the what Hamas is going to do now that the strikes have happened again. I imagine they will still be talking to these mediating countries and trying to get them to pressure Israel to stop what it's doing. I don't think that's going to work. Once Israel, I mean, the main thing here is what the Trump administration, what Donald Trump thinks. Seems like, by public statements on record from U.S. officials last night that they are fully behind this. And they are giving Israel free reign or pretty free reign to do what they want in terms of using military pressure. So I don't think Hamas is going to get any respite there. Yes, there were pretty high level, but not top level talks, both in Doha and Cairo, as you said. Did not get what Israel wanted, did not, also what the U.S. wanted, did not get that extension of the first phase in exchange for half the hostages coming out. So this is where we are now. Again, the hope is, and the logic here is to use this pressure to push Hamas back into this extension of the first phase. There is no intention to go for the second phase. I think the second phase, as I've said throughout, was a Hamas fantasy that it wrongly thought that it could kind of trick Israel into going toward. It's not going to happen. For now, what we have is military operations. It seems like they will continue to escalate unless Hamas makes a different decision about what to do at the negotiating table.
And of course, the condemnations are already rolling in from different countries and the United Nations. And I don't know, coincidentally, shall we say, the United Nations was had already set a meeting at 4 Eastern time, I believe, to discuss what's happening in the Gaza Strip. What do you expect will play out there?
Yeah, I mean, condemnations, okay. It's not going to change what Israel does. Again, the only country that matters in terms of what they say is the United States right now for Israel. And they are fully behind it. And, people can do their pro forma statements all they want. It's not going to change anything. And I'm sure behind the scenes, a lot of these countries are actually don't have a problem with some renewed military pressure. In general, everyone would like to not see another ground invasion and have to deal with all the consequences of that in terms of casualties and humanitarian crisis. Obviously, Egypt wants to see this war end as quickly as possible so it can deal with a lot of its pressing internal issues. But until someone figures out a way, besides military force or a negotiated surrender by Hamas to get Hamas out of Gaza, there's really no better option here. Any sort of plan like what we saw from Egypt, which didn't even mention Hamas, which did not deal with the central problem here, which is the existence and the armament of Hamas, is just a not realistic proposal. It's not going to work, and Israel's not going to accept it.
We'll get to a short break and discuss a little more the U.S. backing of Israel. And we're back. U.S. President Donald Trump yesterday declared that he will hold Iran directly responsible for any future attacks by Yemen's Tehran-backed Houthi rebels, who recently claimed to have targeted a U.S. aircraft carrier and other foreign ships in the Red Sea. Trump posted to his Truth Social platform, and I quote, "Every shot fired by the Houthis will be looked upon from this point forward as being a shot fired from the weapons and leadership of Iran," in caps, "and Iran will be held responsible and suffer the consequences." This is maybe not a change of tune, but a really sharp, precise tune that's being directed towards Iran, even as the U.S. is trying to restart negotiations over its nuclear program. Lazar, how do you read this Trump all caps missive on his Truth Social platform?
Let's remember that the Biden administration carried out or led an extended U.S.-led campaign against the Houthis. There were some serious problems with that campaign in terms of its effectiveness. Didn't really go after the ports where they were smuggling in weapons until very late, until Israel really led the way on that. Was just really not effective. You didn't see any change in Houthis' behavior. And it even seemed like something of a victory for the Houthis. They're able to withstand strikes from the U.S., from Britain, from European countries. But the best way to piss off Donald Trump is to fire at U.S. military vessels and also U.S. civilian vessels. And I think he's doing something smart here. The Houthis aren't going to stop just because of a bombing campaign. They've been through all sorts of bombing campaigns in the past. The topography in terms of the mountainous terrain in the desert in North Yemen is very conducive to withstanding these types of campaigns. And it's not like they have a ton of sympathy for the suffering of the people in Yemen, which is going through what's probably the worst humanitarian crisis in the world. But Iran does care. Iran certainly doesn't want to be bombed by the U.S., does not want to be in a direct conflict with the U.S., does not want to see its own civilians suffering anymore, not because it loves them, but because it knows that could really that could be the tipping point in terms of civilians or the public's willingness to give this regime any more time. So this might indeed be effective. We know that Trump has been open to talking with Iran, but that doesn't mean that he's going to accept their claims. It seems like he's fed up with them. He's giving them an opportunity to negotiate an end to their nuclear program. But if they continue, not reining in their proxies or not reining in their allies in the region, then they're going to pay a price. The question is, how far is Trump willing to go? He did not strike Iranian territory itself in the previous administration, even when the Saudis expected him to. we'll see if the tune has changed this year, if he's actually willing to risk that. He's talked about not starting new wars in the Middle East, but this certainly could lead to that. And he is talking tough. He seems very fed up with Iran. Question is, how exactly is he going to act?
And finally, I want to end with another Trump-related item. And CBS News reported yesterday that Israel and the United States are interested in resettling the Gazans in Syria. So this report came as Israel is working quietly to advance a controversial plan proposed by Trump, in which Gaza's more than 2 million people would be permanently or potentially even temporarily sent elsewhere. Many countries have been on the list so far. Many have rejected the proposal. That includes Egypt and Jordan. Sudan apparently is also on this list. And now we're hearing about Syria. Lazar, Israel is very wary of the new Syrian government. Do you think that it would be party to a proposal to stoop all of the Gazan residents into this war-torn country that is extremely volatile on Israel's border?
As far as I know, shtup means something else, but we can use it here as well. Um, Listen, I think Israel would not care if Gazans are out of Gaza and are in Syria instead. As long as they're not on the border, there's little they can do to threaten Israel. Where they are in Gaza is obviously we've seen the threat that Gaza can pose to Israel. There's already hundreds of thousands of Palestinian refugees, up to third generation refugees, treated by UNRWA, taken care of by UNRWA in Syria. It's unlikely that Syria would be open, or whatever the government controls would be open to taking in tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands more. These other countries aren't exactly, the most desirable places either. Remember, Trump was talking about these beautiful homes and these new safe places for Gazans. Somalia and Sudan don't exactly top my list in terms of desirable locations. Um, that's where things stand right now. Israel has fully embraced this Trump plan and has established working groups to try to make this actually practicable. Of course, the Gazans say they don't want to do it. Arab countries say they don't want this to happen. I still don't see it as especially likely, but it may be with time. If we are able to wrap up this war in Gaza, it'll be easier for those who want to leave to get out, and they won't be held in Gaza by Egypt or any other country that wants to use them as these pawns. But I think if Israel is expecting some sort of, massive, exodus from Gaza, I don't think that's very likely. But as we know, Netanyahu and the Israeli government cannot, or would be well advised to not go against what Trump says. Trump has repeatedly said that this is his plan. He's changed the details of it a few times, but if this is his plan, there's no reason for Israel to get in the way of it. And indeed, they're trying to take it forward. And it seems like they're quietly cooperating with the U.S. and reaching out to some of these countries around the region to see if they could be incentivized to take in thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of Gazans.
Lazar, we are recording on Tuesday at noon. Anything is possible right now in terms of the Gaza war, in terms of restarting into a ground invasion or just being held back to airstrikes. And where do you see the conflict turning at this point? I know prophecy is dead and a fool prophesizes, but at this point, Tuesday at noon, do you see that a ground incursion is in the cards for today, tomorrow, the next day?
No, certainly not that, in the near future. You would see preparations for it. You have to build up the troops. You probably would have to call up reserves. You'd have to move around a lot of troops, and they would be in staging grounds on the border. So not yet. I think there are other ways to ramp up pressure before that, but I am sure that as part of the stage pressure, somewhere up there is either a limited raid, and then beyond that is a full-blown reconquering of the Gaza Strip. That is certainly has to be seen as on the table. And I would imagine that would happen, within months, before the summer even. So that is certainly something that we have to keep an eye out for, but you'll see preparations for it, statements about it, and certainly the movement of troops before that.
Lazar, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Times of Israel's daily briefing. Please check out another installment tomorrow. This episode was produced by the Podwaves. If you have any questions or comments about this or any other episode, please drop us an email to podcast@timesofisrael.com. Until tomorrow, shalom.